So, heard this presentation, so I'm not going to give you an overview of the task force and the work that we did. I'm really here just to give you an update on what is happening now, right? So, as you all know, Governor Newsom signed into law a bill called AB 3121 that created this 2-year task force to not only study, but to also develop reparations proposals for African Americans with special consideration for those who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. We credit this bill to Secretary of State Shirley Weber when she was in the Assembly. She's the one who authored AB 3121, shepherded it through both the State Assembly and the State Senate, and got it to Governor Newsom's desk where he signed it into law September 30th, 2020. And so, the task force, as I said, we worked for over 2 years. I was the chairperson, but, other commissioners included well-known scholars, academics, clergy members like Dr. Amos Brown, Reverend Amos Brown, who is the pastor of Third Baptist Church in San Francisco, was one of the few students to actually be taught by the late Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. when he taught at Morehouse Seminary. We had renowned civil rights attorneys and elected officials on this task force as well. As I mentioned in the previous conversation, we worked over 2 years. We enlisted over 150 expert witnesses, over 100 personal witnesses to help inform what was going to be in this report, what was going to be in the study, right? In terms of the areas of systemic discrimination that the task force, pretty much argued that there should be reparations for, not just for slavery, but particularly when we're talking about California, we're basing our argument that there should be reparations for the lingering badges and incidents of slavery, for the systemic areas of discrimination that still exist in this society post-slavery. That's where the bulk of our recommendations are actually aimed at, not necessarily slavery, even though that is the crux of kind of like what this is all about. But again, our over 115 policy recommendations that we're urging the state legislature to turn our policies into legislation. Again, it's aimed at, eradicating, ending, lingering badges and incidents of slavery, ending systemic discrimination that has its root in enslavement. And so, this, again, I talked about this before in the earlier presentation, right? Enslavement is kind of the poisonous tree, so to speak. And, the 12 chapters is pretty much the fruit of that poisonous tree, right? Racial terror, political disenfranchisement, housing segregation, separate and unequal education, racism in the environment and infrastructure, the pathologizing of Black families, the control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life, stolen labor, hindered opportunity, unjust legal system, mental and physical harm and neglect, and the wealth gap. Those 12 areas, again, the task force identified as those 12 major areas of systemic discrimination, or what we call the lingering badges and incidents of slavery, that we structured our policy recommendations around. And so now what you see now that the task force is over, you have legislators picking up on our policy recommendations and turning them into legislation. And so the rest of my presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of where we are in that process. And this presentation is also on my website. I'll send that over to you all in the chat. So yeah, let's just get straight to, so this is, the legislative process is extremely convoluted and confusing. And so, but just simply put though, how a bill becomes law, a California legislator introduces a bill. If that legislator is a senator, it first moves through the Senate, and then it has to go to the Assembly to pass, and then it goes to the governor. If an assembly member, if it's an assembly member that introduces a bill, it first has to go through the assembly on all the different committees in the assembly, then it has to go through the Senate, and it has to go through that similar process, and then to the governor's desk. So key dates to consider. August 31st of this year is the last day for each house to pass any given bills. Um, and so none of the reparations bills have gotten to a floor vote yet, but August 31st would be the last day for any of these given reparations bills to pass through the Assembly and the Senate. And then September 30th is the very last day that Governor Newsom can sign or veto bills passed by the legislature before September 1st. Also, there's something called a pocket veto, where if Governor Newsom just allows a bill to kind of stay on his desk without signing it or vetoing it, it becomes law through a technicality. So there's two ways that these reparations bills can become law, either by Governor Newsom outright signing them into law by September 30th, or just by him just letting it kind of sit on his desk. So now I'm going to, as Adam said, there are currently 19 bills that legislators, primarily Black legislators, members of the California Legislative Black Caucus, have introduced based on the task force's recommendations. So the task force, we recommended over 115 policy recommendations, and legislators have so far introduced about 19 of those policies and translated them into legislation. So I'll first give an update on the initial 14 bills that the California Legislative Black Caucus introduced at the top of the year. I believe January 31st is when they made the announcement introducing these 14 bills. And again, none of these bills have gotten to a floor vote yet. They're all in their various different committee stages. So the first bill is AB 2064, introduced by introduced by Assemblymember Joan Sawyer. It would fund community-driven solutions to decrease community violence at the family, school, and neighborhood levels in the African American communities by establishing a state-funded grant program. So based on what I've heard from Joan Sawyer, again, this would create essentially what it says, a state-funded grant program that would be given to, community-based organizations in African American communities, but it doesn't necessarily have to be two organizations that are just for African Americans. It's all aimed at, again, decreasing community violence in all various different levels in communities that are predominantly African American. When I read the text of that bill, there's not much substance to it yet, but in terms of where it is at right now, it's pending. So it will be getting a hearing via the Assembly Appropriations Committee, but it has not gotten a date yet. So there hasn't been a date assigned to this bill being heard at the Assembly Appropriations Committee. But again, keep in mind that August 31st date, these bills have to go through their various different committees well before that date. ACA 7, that when you see ACA, that means it's a constitutional amendment. That means that there's something in the California Constitution that has to change. And if that's the case, then when you see a bill that says ACA, it has to pass through the Assembly and the Senate. But instead of it going to the governor's desk, it's going to go to you. It's going to go to you on your ballot. Because it changes the Constitution. It's that significant. So I just wanted to educate folks on what that means. And so ACA 7 would amend the California Constitution to allow the state to fund programs for the purpose of increasing the life expectancy of or improving educational outcomes for or lifting out of poverty specific groups. So again, that is a bill that is not specific to African Americans, but that bill does, it essentially brings back race-based affirmative action, just to be very frank and with you all. Proposition 17 was another bill a couple of years ago that would have done the same thing. That would have brought back race-based affirmative action, since it's been illegal since 1996 via Proposition 209. But Proposition 17, I think it failed. Oh, it did fail. And so ACA 7, introduced by Assemblymember Corey Jackson, is kind of his way of kind of bringing that issue back, by saying, by pretty much bringing back the issue of race-based affirmative action. And so where is that in the process? It is pending. So it will be getting a hearing in the Senate Rules Committee, but it has not received a date yet. ACR 135 introduced, and that is a resolution. So it's the Assembly bill, but then there's also a Senate companion bill called SCR 113. And again, this is just a resolution that formally recognizes and accepts responsibility for all of the harms and atrocities committed by the representatives of the state who promoted, facilitated, enforced, and permitted the institution of chattel slavery. This bill, particularly ACR 135 and SCR 113, they did pass some of their first initial committee hearings, which is really good. But now it's pending via the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it hasn't received a vote of a hearing yet via the Senate Judiciary Committee. But in the previous committees, they've passed with flying colors. So that's why now it's going to get a hearing at the Senate Judiciary Committee. The next bill, part of the CLBC's initial reparations package, is AB 1815, that would prohibit discrimination based on natural and protective hairstyles in all competitive sports by extending the Crown Act to explicitly include competitive sports within California. So basically that would allow for, Black folks who are in competitive sports to not be discriminated against for wearing, natural styles like dreads or braids and stuff like that. And so, again, that is also pending before the Senate Rules Committee, but it has not received a date yet. Okay, next slide. So the next one is AB 2862. That would eliminate barriers to licensure for people with criminal records. And it would prioritize African-American applicants seeking occupational licenses, especially those who are descendants. It got a committee hearing yesterday. I forgot where exactly the committee hearing was, but I think it did pass that committee yesterday. So now it's pending the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and we haven't gotten a date for that next phase yet. When I get to the later part of my conversation, there are some bills that have received dates, so don't worry on that part. So number 6, SB 1089, that would address food injustice by requiring advance notification to community stakeholders prior to the closure of a grocery store and underserved or at-risk communities. The idea for that bill is that, a lot of Black folks and brown folks kind of live in what are called food deserts or food swamps, where they're surrounded by, liquor stores and fast food restaurants, and not necessarily by, many grocery stores. I know in the area that I'm at, where I was born and raised, South Central LA, there's really only one grocery store in like a 5-6 mile radius. It's really bad. And that grocery store actually might be closing. So this bill, I guess, would address that problem by, grocery stores having to give advance notification to community stakeholders prior to these stores closing. And so that bill has most recently, as of the 6th, been placed on what's called the suspense file. And that's a committee where it's similar to appropriations, but not necessarily, but it's a committee where they essentially they judge the I guess you could say the budgetary ramifications of bills. So again, a suspense file is a process in which the California legislature allows legislators to consider bills that could affect the state's budget. Um, there is this idea where if bills get sent to the suspense file, that's where bills go to die. There's a whole kind of story behind that. But hopefully that's not the case for these bills that have recently been referred to the suspense file. So AB 1975 is the next bill, and that was introduced by Assemblymember Mia Bonta. That would make medically supportive food and nutrition interventions when deemed medically necessary by healthcare providers a permanent part of Medi-Cal benefits. So essentially, if you receive Medi-Cal through this bill, if it passes, that would support essentially a nutritionist to support you in coming up with, food and nutrition interventions that currently doesn't exist as a benefit via Medi-Cal. And it is also pending before the Assembly Appropriations Committee, but it has not received a date just yet. So again, moving on to, again, recapping the first 14 bills introduced by CLBC, and then we'll address the 5 additional bills as well. AB 3089, introduced by Reginald Jones Sawyer. It's an apology bill. It issues a formal apology for human rights violations and crimes against humanity on African slaves and their descendants. I think this bill is actually the closest bill to getting a floor vote. I think it's passed all its various committees. It's been read a second time, and now it's ordered to a third reading. And I think soon that bill could actually be one of the first bills to get to a floor vote in the Assembly. ACA 8, that again, ACA, that's something that actually Laura was talking about earlier. That would amend the California Constitution to prohibit involuntary servitude for incarcerated persons, would no longer allow forced labor in California prisons. A similar bill was introduced by then State Senator Kamlager, but now she's a U.S. Congresswoman for the state of California, the 35th District. She introduced a similar bill last legislative session, and the state Senate did not pass it. The state Assembly did, but the state Senate did. And so therefore, it never got to your ballot for voters to decide. And so now you have Assemblymember Lori Wilson reintroducing the bill via ACA 8. Hopefully it passes both the Assembly and the Senate so that California voters can decide whether or not we want to still have forced labor in our prisons. And so where is it at right now? It's pending via the Senate Rules Committee, but it has not received an exact date for that hearing. Number 10, AB 1986, introduced by Assemblymember Isaac Bryan, would eliminate the California Department Correction and Rehabilitation practice of banning books without oversight and review. So Isaac Bryan, he's talked about how, you can read like certain books like Mein Kampf from Hitler in prisons, but you can't read books on like Frida Kahlo or, certain books around Black history and things like that. And so this bill would essentially, ban that practice of banning books without, significant oversight and review. And so, this bill has passed through its various different committees, right, with flying colors, but right now it's pending via the Senate Public Safety Committee. So yeah, it's like you see the progression, it's almost halfway there, 50%. Okay, so let's see. The next one is AB 280. And this one's a bit confusing for me. I've been trying to get some calls, but I think this is not going to move by August 31st. It's called the Mandela Act. It would restrict solitary confinement within CDCR detention facilities. So, we'll see what happens about that, but I haven't got a comprehensive update on what this actually means in terms of ordering to inactive file. Okay. So AB 1929 would allow deeper analysis, data collection of technical education grants. Essentially, it's calling for data disaggregation on the California community college level within the Black African racial group. So they want to disaggregate to see, of these technical education grants, how many people are descendants of slaves who are getting these grants versus maybe, people of African immigrant origin. So it's a data collection bill. It has been ordered to the consent calendar as of May 2nd. So we're getting to the more interesting, kind of more substantive bills sooner. So thank you. So AB 1331 would target economic support to formerly redlined communities. And it is pending via the Assembly Appropriations Committee, but it has not received a hearing date yet. And then you have SB 1050. So think about Bruce Beach, how LA County facilitated for the descendants of Willa and Anna Bruce, that Black couple who had a beach resort in Manhattan Beach that was taken away via racially motivated eminent domain, allowing for them to get their land back. And then they also kind of sold the land so they were able to get cash or compensation as an alternative. This bill would allow for that same process to happen for people similarly situated as the Bruces. So not even just Black people, just people who can prove that their land was taken away via racially motivated eminent domain. So that passed the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it is set for a Senate Appropriations Committee this upcoming Monday at 10 a.m. And so the last 5 bills, so I just gave you an overview of the initial 14 bills that the CLBC introduced. Now, these are 5 additional bills that Senator Bradford introduced on his own, 4 additional bills that Senator Bradford introduced on his own, and then 1 additional bill that Joan Sawyer introduced on his own. So SB 1403, that would create a new state agency for descendants of slaves, to provide resources, but to also provide oversight over existing state agencies to ensure that African Americans' rights, privileges, and immunities are not being violated. I went up to Sacramento a couple of weeks ago and gave testimony in favor of this bill to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and they passed it, I think 8-1. And so now they had it, and then the next stage, they had a hearing at the Senate Appropriations Committee Monday at 10 a.m., which passed. But now it's placed in the suspense file. And again, that's a process in which that committee considers bills that could affect the state's budget. And so that's kind of where this bill is at now. And I have to look into what are some ways in which, if people can, participate in that suspense file committee. So SB 1331, that would create a new state fund for reparations and reparative justice. That would reallocate 6% of the state's, I believe, rainy day fund, and that would be put into a new fund for reparations and reparative justice. It passed the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is great. And it is set for a Senate Appropriations Committee hearing this upcoming Monday at 10 a.m. SB 1013, that would provide property tax assistance to descendants of slaves. It passed the Senate Revenue and Taxation Committee recently, and it's also set for a Senate Appropriations Committee hearing on Monday. SB 1007 would create a program to provide cash grants to help descendants of slaves purchase their first home, or if they already have a home, for mortgage payments as well, or homeowners insurance. And that's a bill to essentially rectify California's role in housing segregation and redlining and racially restrictive covenants. And so This bill has passed the Senate Housing Committee, and it is now placed on the suspense file, so there's no action at the moment. And then last, you have AB 3152, which was introduced by Joan Sawyer, which is a very interesting bill. I have to look more into it, admittedly, but it would create a new fund that would use separate from this Reparations Reparative Justice Fund that I already talked about that Bradford introduced, but it would create a new fund that would be used to fund qualified housing loans as well as education to descendants of slaves. And that fund would be used via an excise tax. So with SB 1331 with Bradford, he's just asking for, certain funds that are already in the state to be reallocated, to be put into this fund, versus Joan Sawyer, he's actually advocating for a new tax, an excise tax on products, if you read the text of the bill, on products that are historically tied to slavery, like tobacco, cotton, even Black slaves, had something to do with wine in this state as well. So tobacco, cotton, gold, because Black slaves were brought here for the gold rush, wine, those various different, items, be a particular excise tax, and that tax would go to fund qualified housing loans and education grants to descendants of slaves. And so that is also pending the Assembly Rules Committee, but there's no particular date. So, I mean, in all, there's many different ways that folks can get involved that I'll follow up with Adam on. There's a statewide coalition of organizations, supporting primarily Bradford's bills. But again, there's so many ways that folks can get involved. I'll also put into the chat 3 links. There's Cal Matters has a toolkit where you can track the status of these bills in real time. And you can also track the status of these bills and any given bills throughout the country, in various different state legislatures and even nationally via a website called legiscan.com. And then also, given that, most of Bradford's particular bills are getting a hearing via the Senate Appropriations Committee Monday at 10 a.m., I'll put a link into the chat where you can actually, as an individual, send the Appropriations Committee an email saying you support these bills as well. So I know that was pretty long, but if y'all have any questions, let me know. But I'm glad to be here before you all and give you an update on, what's happening, which is really history in the making, and looking forward to making history with you all. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kamilah. Thank you. Thank you. Questions? What are some questions folks have?
I have a question I don't think Kamilah can answer, though. What took these people so long?
Right? I don't know.
Hi, Kamilah. I think my question is, because I had this conversation recently, and I just read up about it maybe in the last 2 days. But for African Americans who can't prove that they're descendants of slaves, how will that work?
So in the bill, SB 1403, that would create this new state agency called the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency. There's going to be 3 offices that the text of the bill says. There's going to be the secretary of this agency, right? That's going to run the show, essentially. There's going to be a legal counsel that's going to deal with, the legalities of whatever the agency implies. But then there's also going to be a genealogy office. And that genealogy office is going to support, essentially what you're getting at, support those who may be eligible for whatever this agency will provide, but, really have, they don't have the resources to show that, they're a descendant of slaves. So that genealogy office is would be assisting people in real time with making those connections.
Okay, and the other question is that if they're getting direct funding, why would they need assistance with purchasing homes?
That's a good question. And so out of all of these 19 bills, what has been missing is there is no bill of these 19 bills that would provide direct cash payments to descendants of slaves. There's many different reasons why, you know, the CLBC said that they decided not to introduce a bill that would provide direct cash payments. I think there's actually a poll that came out via UC Berkeley's Intergovernmental Studies right after the task force ended. Because keep in mind, the task force, we recommended direct cash payments, and we just didn't, you know, pull a number out of the hat. We actually hired 5 economists, well-known economists, to help us come up with a plan for compensation and an argument for compensation. And just to be brief, you know, we stated that there should be compensation not for slavery, but for these 5 state-sanctioned atrocity areas post-slavery that the economists actually found data to prove that the state was culpable in harming African Americans, and that was housing segregation, right, for allowing redlining, for allowing racially restrictive covenants, for under prosecuting violent incidents where Black Americans' houses were literally firebombed in the state of California in the 50s and 60s to get them out of desirable neighborhoods, right? And so we said that there should be compensation for that. We said there should be compensation for mass incarceration over policing. We said there should be compensation for the devaluation of Black businesses, you know, the idea that the state is allowing for discrimination against Black folks who are trying to create businesses and maintain businesses. We said that there should be compensation for health harms, the idea that there's a 7.5-year life expectancy gap between Black Californians and white Californians. And so again, we said that there should be compensation for those particular areas, right? That there was data and proof to show state culpability. And so we were hoping as a task force that, you know, any legislator would pick up, you know, that recommendation, but they decided not to. And I think it's because right after the task force ended, again, there was a poll that came out that pretty much stated that that polled 6,000 Californian voters, but they pretty much extrapolated that to, you know, to say that, you know, that's representative of the state of California. And pretty much said that of those polled, 59% of those polled were actually against direct cash payments. So essentially they're saying 59% of Californians, so a majority of Californians, are not in favor of providing direct cash payments to descendants of slaves, right? Those same people, just to conclude, I promise, those same people agreed. So the majority of those agreed, the majority of those polled agreed in saying that the state of California is not doing enough for Black people. Those same people also said that the discrimination and the legacy of slavery still persists and still negatively affects African Americans. However, they just don't agree that cash payments is the solution. And so I do think, just to answer your question, you were like, why do we need, you know, this bill that would give housing grants if we can just get direct cash payments? Well, we're going to have to just deal with, you know, this housing bill because, you know, no legislator has decided to pick up on the task force's recommendations for direct cash payments. And I think it's probably political in nature because most Black legislators actually don't only represent Black folks. You know, I don't think there's any majority Black district in this state when we're talking about state assembly and the state Senate. So I think there's just a lot of political calculus that comes into it. Obviously, there has to be a lot more education, a lot more convincing. Black folks are only 6% of this state, so you know we can't go at this alone in order to kind of get what we deserve.
Thank you, Kamilah. I appreciate it. So the bottom line is that they still won't really get reparations. You guys went through all of that, but the people, the Black folks that need it the most, they still won't get it. But that's
Well, yeah, I'll just say,
Bottom
I was going to say, under international law, there's 5 forms of reparations: compensation, restitution, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. And as someone who's studied international law, I've said time and time again at these task force hearings that you can't call a reparations program full and effective unless it includes all 5 of those forms. And so, to your point, of these 19 bills, what's glaringly obviously missing is something that's direct cash payments or compensation. So can you call this a comprehensive reparations package? There's some people who say yes, there's some people who say no. But, I am supportive of all 19 of these bills because, it gets us to a point where we can, it sets a strong foundation for us to continue to advocate for stronger bills, including compensation bills, in the next legislative session. So I am in full support of all 19 of these bills, and I hope that they all pass by August 31st.
I have a real quick question, Kamilah. I know I work on some other coalitions that are, for example, one is about ICE out of California, another one is paid family leave. And I know with those coalitions, they're like, for each of them, there's like 40 different organizations that are meeting together to try and get legislation passed. Is there something like that? Are there a lot of different organizations that you have kind of gathered to meet together as a coalition so they can help push all of these different bills forward?
Yes, so I, in connection with a coalition called Californians Organizing for Reparation, called CORE, and so they have, it's a group of various different organizations that are primarily supporting Bradford's bills, but and those 5 kind of bills that I mentioned towards the end of the conversation. But I've been in conversations with Vice Chair Amos Brown about this, about kind of doing something similar, but more kind of broader in terms of let's support all 19 of these bills. Let's do a push between now and August 31st to do that. So, but I just want to uplift CORE. CORE I've been working with them since last year, so they've been really doing good work. But again, they're just really focusing on those 5, 6 bills, not necessarily all 19.
Thank you.
It's 2:31, and so if it's okay, we can, keep people just for another few minutes. If anybody has any further questions, please maybe email me and Kamilah, and we can try and get those answers out to the rest of the group. But just want to, thank you so much, Kamilah, for being here. And to our folks, the plan with Clue is that this package, the way that we see this package of so-called reparations, it's clearly incomplete, but it is a part of it. It's the first bite of the elephant, that we're trying to eat. The way that we're looking at it strategically from Clue is that this is a fight that could take it's definitely going to take years, could take decades. And right now, what we're doing, right now we have a small group of committed folks in the faith community who are, ready to start fighting, but we don't necessarily have the numbers and the education yet to fight these bigger fights that are going to be really difficult. The things related to direct compensation. But what we really want to do, from our perspective, is try and use this opportunity this year as an opportunity to build, use the next year as an opportunity to build even more, and do it more and more and more, so that we finally do get to a tipping point at some point where we can have the leverage we need to support the brilliant folks like Kamilah who are leading this charge for us and who have done the work. So we're excited to keep doing that. Just so folks know, if a Clue right now, we've been setting up denomination-wide talks with Kamilah. So far, the UUs in Orange County are going to be hosting something Kamilah is going to be presenting for the United Church of Christ folks at their conference in June. She's going to be speaking to the, doing a presentation for the entire Lutheran Pacifica Synod in June as well. And we're currently working to try and see if we can get something together with the Episcopal Diocese and the Catholic Diocese. So, but if anybody else has any ideas for groups that we can educate around this, please do reach out to me ASAP. I think for us, there are letters and things that we can be sending, this month and next month, but I think, July is really going to be the moment when we want to start hitting the ground. Our legislators will be back in town from Sacramento for their recess, and we want to start trying to stalk those folks and set up delegations and meetings to meet with them and push them. And then in August, really start pushing when they're back to vote on these things. And then we'll go hold the flame to the fire, or the fire to the feet of Governor Newsom. So that's the plan right now. And anyone who has any ideas, and actually one assignment I'll just leave for folks is, how are we going to talk about this to faith community? What is our elevator pitch, and then what are our sermons? How are we going to talk about this to our to folks to move them past all of the hurdles that white supremacists and other folks are going to be putting forward to dampen our confidence in doing anything like this, and to try and confuse folks. So